now to Tawhid Islam, who's the Chief Executive of Liverpool Muslim Council. Tawhid, really good to see you this afternoon. Your reflections on what's unfolding behind us, some distressing detail coming out. You know, it's upsetting for me to read it out. So for the community affected, Southport, Liverpool, Merseyside as a whole, what's today mean? What is it like to relive this today?
It's extremely difficult. I guess there is some comfort in the fact that there was a guilty plea, and that shared an ordeal of a 4-week trial and, you know, horrific circumstances being lived again and again for the families who have been affected, who have been so strong and so brave in how they've responded since the atrocities took place. Communities are still very much sad. They're still very much trying to reflect on everything that's happened and trying to heal, which will take some time. I guess a lot of detail has come out which hasn't helped, and there's a lot of confusion and fear as to why Axel Rudakubana had been referred to Prevent 3 times. He'd been referred to other agencies as well, and unfortunately, those institutions didn't act accordingly. So whilst there shouldn't be one individual held to account, there has to be some level of accountability in respects to what happened. Are these institutions fit for purpose? Are these referrals being resourced properly? In a lot of ways, they're not, and communities need answers, and we need the truth to come out. And so we can begin the process of trying to move on, and most importantly, the families can have that process of trying to move on and trying to understand what happened. Ultimately, 3 beautiful lives have been lost, and we need time to reflect on that and ensure, and communities need to be certain that these type of atrocities and tragedies can't be allowed to happen again.
Tara, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned Prevent there. It's now well known that Rudakubana was referred to them 3 times.
Yeah.
3 times he was seen not to be a risk because he didn't fit the parameter with what Prevent deal with, which is terrorism and extremism. He didn't subscribe to an ideology. He was a young man obsessed with violence. And there are many young men like that in the UK. And he got passed to various different agencies, but none of those agencies seem to have had the remit to deal with that obsession of violence. And it's been pointed out to me, and you raised it before we began speaking here live on air, that this was an act of violence against girls, girls and young women. And that needs to be talked about more, because we talk about, was this terrorism, was this not terrorism? This was violence against women and girls, which in the main, and we talk about it so much here on Sky News, needs to be taken more seriously.
It does, and I feel that it's not being talked about enough. He did target a girls' dance class, and we hear more and more in the media about violence against women and this perpetuation of violence against women. And why aren't we having serious discussions about that? Like you're saying, you know, we're talking about...
Why does it have to be classed as terrorism for it to be dealt with appropriately?
Exactly. Why are we talking about terrorism and extremism all the time? Why aren't we talking about why was a girls' dance class targeted? Why are women being targeted? And why are some of the most violent acts being committed against women across all communities? And that discussion doesn't seem to be being had at the moment, and it's worrying that this is being allowed to just play out in a way that isn't getting to the fundamentals of what happened. That's who he targeted, and it needs to be talked about openly, and hard questions need to be asked.
Can I ask about the immediate aftermath of that attack? In the coming days, we saw riots and protests because of misinformation that the attacker was a migrant. And the Muslim community in Southport, part of the Southport community, was targeted by people from outside Southport. I spoke to so many people saying, these are not people from Southport. The Muslim community is part of the community. It's not us and them. How do you move on from that? Because it feels like it was an easy target for those that wanted to get angry about something. And we talk about, why are people getting angry about violence against women and girls? Why is it being conflated with sort of race or terrorism? This is, regardless of skin colour or, you know, ideology, this is violence against women and girls. How have you moved on from that? Because that must have been something hard to see as a byproduct of something so awful.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is no correlation between one and the other.
Yeah.
So why there was a racist anti-immigration agenda that came out of the tragedies of Southport is still a mystery to everyone. But obviously the misinformation on social media, and then some, you know, there's politicians who have been perpetuating this cycle of misinformation and trying to stoke division. It hasn't been dealt with. It hasn't been dealt with in a way that gives communities confidence to actually just get about the normal business. And, you know, like you quite rightfully mentioned, people were coming from outside of Southport to attack a community that had nothing to do with anything that happened. So we need to sort of build those bridges in communities that actually, you know, you can't fight fear by creating more fear.
Well,
you know,
Southport came straight to the
absolutely, they did.
You know,
they were
tidy up the
rebuilding.
mosque,
Absolutely.
you know.
The next day they were there. They were rebuilding. They were cleaning. No one asked them. They just were there for their community, and I think that is one of the great responses that we saw out of all of this. But a lot more needs to be done to give communities that confidence back, that actually misinformation needs to be tackled, that, you know, neighbours need to stand together and communities really need to come together. You know, diversity is a strength. It's not something that should be feared, and actually we need to unite more.